Bitter winds slashed across Montana's endless prairie like frozen razors. The year was 1873, a winter the elderly folks of Cedar Ridge would swear was the harshest they'd ever witnessed. Snowfall descended in thick, impenetrable curtains, swallowing fence posts whole and obliterating the pathways connecting the scattered homesteads. Death rode with that tempest, and Sarah Whitman barely escaped its clutches. Her feet pushed through knee-deep powder, each stride more labored than before. The blue cotton of her dress had stiffened with ice, her wrap offering no more protection than tissue paper against nature's fury. Her mouth had darkened to purple, flesh ghostly white, fingers completely numb. Dawn had marked the beginning of her trek, but time had dissolved into endless white void. Desperation filled her. Cast out, unwelcome, nearly ready to surrender to the blizzard's embrace. Just yesterday, Cedar Ridge had banished her completely. The rumors had begun circulating months prior, spreading through the small community like prairie fire. A young woman widowed, surviving alone by washing clothes for local men. Neighbors whispered she grew too familiar during these interactions. The banker's spouse even claimed to witness Sarah in compromising circumstances with her husband. None of it held truth. Yet in Cedar Ridge, reputation mattered more than facts. Come evening, her landlord demanded her departure. "Your sort isn't welcome," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Damages my establishment." Dawn found her trudging through snow, expelled from her sole refuge. Without relatives, companions, or destination, simply a woman bearing false accusations and a spirit crushed by harsh condemnation. The gale screamed around her, draining her remaining vitality. Sarah's limbs trembled violently. Her body surrendered as unconsciousness crept closer, yet through the white chaos she glimpsed salvation, a dark silhouette standing firm against the pale backdrop. Shelter. She gasped, though her voice emerged as barely audible breath, forcing herself onward. Using her final reserves, she forced open the massive door and tumbled within. The scent of dried grass, horses shifting restlessly, the gentle heat from their breathing. After the external chaos, it felt divine. Sarah crawled to a corner, buried herself beneath loose straw, and yielded to the encroaching darkness. Memories of James, her deceased spouse, claimed by illness 24 months earlier, drifted through her mind. She recalled the children never born, the dwelling she'd forfeited. Her form grew heavy, eyelids closing. Death seemed imminent. Thomas Morrison discovered her in this state. He'd ventured into the tempest to inspect his livestock, his lamp casting golden light through the gloom. At 35, Thomas stood tall and powerfully built, weathered by countless seasons managing his property. His existence had grown solitary, perhaps too much so, since Elizabeth's passing 3 winters back. He shared his days with livestock and the prairie's silence. However, pushing open the barn entrance that evening, he stopped cold. Someone lay motionless on the ground. His initial assumption, a wandering drifter. Occasionally men sought shelter on ranches, though not all proved trustworthy. When he raised his lantern higher, his pulse stopped. Not male, but female, and dying from exposure. Thomas dropped beside her, calloused hands touching her face. Her flesh felt like winter itself, her mouth nearly violet. Each breath so shallow he pressed close to detect it. "Miss," he said, gently shaking her shoulder. "Do you hear me?" No response. Her form remained statue still. Thomas recognized death's approach, and it lurked at her threshold. Abandoning her meant certain doom within the hour. He acted without hesitation. Lifting her into his arms, he battled back through the storm. She felt weightless as a sparrow. The wind attempted to steal her away, but Thomas persevered step by agonizing step until his dwelling appeared ahead. Inside, he placed her before the hearth, stoking flames high. Every blanket he owned covered her still form, yet her skin stayed ashen and frigid. He'd witnessed similar cases on the frontier. Fabric coverings proved insufficient. Only one method could restore life to someone so far gone: another person's warmth. Improper, scandalous. A widow in his bedroom would generate whispers destroying both their standings. But social conventions meant nothing against mortality. Thomas carried her again into his private chamber, working swiftly to remove her frozen garments. He averted his gaze as much as possible, preserving whatever modesty remained. Then he stripped to his underclothes, drew her close against him, and wrapped them both in thick quilts. Her flesh burned with cold. He held tight, whispering though she couldn't hear. "Don't surrender, miss. Fight this. Remain with me." Time crawled past. Gradually, he sensed the first transformation. Her breathing deepened. Her lips lost their blue tint. Her body began shivering, life battling back. Thomas maintained his grip, fighting his own weariness, refusing rest. Dawn brought stirring. A soft sound escaped her throat. Her eyes opened wide, bewildered and frightened. "Peace," Thomas spoke gently, his tone steady yet commanding. "You're protected. You nearly perished by my barn. I brought you to safety." Her eyes filled with moisture, from shame, relief, or simple exhaustion, he couldn't determine. But she lived. In that instant, Thomas Morrison understood that regardless of whatever challenges lay ahead, everything had transformed forever. Sarah awakened gradually, heavy covers surrounding her warmly. For one precious moment, she imagined herself back in her former home with James alive beside her. Opening her eyes revealed a modest ranch bedroom. Rough-hewn furnishings, stone hearth, her torn dress drying near the flames. Looking down, she discovered herself wearing a man's shirt extending past her knees. Fear gripped her chest. Where had she ended up? What had occurred? The door opened. A tall figure entered bearing a tray. His light brown hair appeared disheveled, his blue eyes alert but cautious, as if observing a wild creature that might flee. He placed the tray on her nightstand. "You've awakened," he said in a low, measured voice. "I've prepared some soup. You must nourish yourself." Sarah clutched the blankets tighter. "Where am I exactly?" "Thomas Morrison," he replied. "This is my ranch. I discovered you in my barn last evening. You nearly died from the cold." Recollection flooded back. The tempest, the barn, the relentless chill. Her throat constricted. "I shouldn't be present," she whispered. "If anyone discovered this, your standing would be destroyed." Thomas's expression hardened. "People may think whatever they choose. I refuse to abandon folks to freeze in blizzards." "You don't comprehend," Sarah said, tears stinging her eyes. "They claim I'm—" The words wouldn't emerge. The shame felt overwhelming. "I'm aware of your identity," Thomas said kindly. "Sarah Whitman, James Whitman's widow. The town rejected you over falsehoods and hearsay. I've lived in isolation long enough to distinguish between truth and idle chatter." She stared, amazed. He knew everything, yet still rescued her. "You were dying," he continued, voice unwavering. "Coverings weren't sufficient. The sole method to preserve your life was shared body heat. I maintain propriety as much as possible, but I want complete honesty with you. No wrongdoing occurred here. You were saved." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment, though something else awakened within her. Thankfulness, relief, an unexpected spark of trust. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas nodded once and turned to leave. "Consume the soup. Rest yourself. The storm continues raging. You're secure here until it passes. Secure." The word felt foreign to her tongue. She hadn't experienced security in months. After Thomas departed, Sarah slowly sipped the broth, feeling warmth spread throughout her body. Later she rose, unsteady but stronger, discovering a chest filled with women's clothing, his late wife's belongings. She selected a simple brown dress carrying a faint lavender scent, her heart aching for this unknown woman. By midday, she was in the kitchen preparing a modest meal from his provisions. When Thomas returned from the barn, snow clinging to his coat, he paused at the sight of her working at the stove. "You should be resting," he said. "I've rested sufficiently," Sarah replied. "I don't accept charity without contributing something in return." She placed a plate before him. For an extended moment, they dined in silence, only the storm pounding the walls audible. Yet it was an uncomfortable quiet. It felt almost natural, almost like being home. Throughout the following days, they established a routine. She repaired clothing, baked bread, maintained the fire. He cleared snow, tended livestock, inspected fences buried in drifts. Nights found her in the bedroom, him on bedding beside the hearth. The tempest raged around them, but within remained warmth. On the fourth day, when skies cleared, Sarah gazed out at a transformed landscape, snow gleaming like precious stones, air crisp and pure. She should have felt relief that the town road would soon open. Instead, her heart grew heavy. She didn't wish to depart. At breakfast, Thomas set down his coffee and spoke carefully. "The road will be passable soon. You could travel to another settlement if that's your desire." Sarah studied her plate. "And travel where?" "Another town that will hear the gossip eventually. Another place for rejection." You can't be certain of that, Thomas said. I am, Sarah replied bitterly. A woman alone, no family, no references. There's only one way people perceive her. Silence extended between them. Then Thomas leaned forward. There's another option. Remain here. Work the ranch alongside me. Tend the garden come spring. Manage the household if you wish. It would be respectable. You'd have the bedroom. I'd keep the main room. Simply a fair arrangement. Sarah's heart pounded. People would gossip. They already do, Thomas said, eyes steady. But I don't care. Let them talk. I've lived with their whispers for years. I know what it's like being outside their circle. It doesn't matter. What matters is survival, and perhaps something more. Sarah looked at him then, truly observed. He was younger than she'd realized, only a few years her senior at 26. Grief had aged him, yes, but behind it she saw strength, steadiness she hadn't known in so long. Her voice barely whispered. Very well. I'll stay. Relief flickered across his features, quickly hidden. He nodded once, then rose to gather firewood. But Sarah's heart knew something had shifted permanently. That evening, lying in bed listening to the storm's final whispers, she thought of the man in the adjacent room, a stranger yet familiar, a man who had preserved her life, asking nothing in return. She pulled the quilt close, her heart both fearful and hopeful. For the first time in months, she dreamed not of death, but of tomorrow. Wait, before we continue, what are your thoughts on the story so far? Share your reactions in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. Spring crept slowly across Montana's plains, battling winter for every piece of ground. By March, snow began melting and brown earth patches emerged. Life returned gradually, birds singing at dawn, streams flowing as ice broke, sunlight lingering longer each evening. Sarah had remained at Morrison Ranch nearly 3 months. What started as temporary shelter had become something feeling more lasting. Daily she rose early, helped prepare meals, tended their started garden, and cared for the house silent too long, but evenings stayed with her most. Sitting across from Thomas at the table, listening to crackling flames, their silences grew gentler, warmer. Sometimes he shared stories from his youth, breaking his first horse, how Elizabeth, his late wife, loved singing while cooking. Sarah listened with chest aching, but also with quiet thankfulness. He shared himself gradually, like a man remembering how to exist again. One afternoon, Sarah stood in the corral, her hand on a young colt's nose that Thomas had been training. The animal's warm breath touched her palm. Thomas leaned against the fence, watching. You have a way with them, he said. Gentle, patient. They trust you. Sarah smiled faintly. I used to ride before James died. Before everything changed. Perhaps you'll ride again, Thomas replied. His eyes held hers for a long moment, and she felt something shift in the air between them. That evening, working side by side in the kitchen, Sarah asked softly, Thomas, why do you care so little about the town's opinions? Doesn't it trouble you? He set down the knife he'd been using to cut salt pork. I cared once, but after Elizabeth died I learned something. Gossip doesn't warm you in winter. It doesn't repair fences or feed cattle, and it doesn't provide company during long nights. Truth matters, work matters, decency matters. The rest I can exist without. Sarah looked at him then, truly observed. A man shaped by loss but not hardened by it. A man who still believed in kindness when the world had given him every reason not to. Her throat tightened. You're a finer man than most. Days grew longer. Snow melted into mud. Ranch life demanded everything they possessed. Together they planted rows of beans and carrots, repaired broken fences, hauled water for thirsty soil. Sarah worked harder than ever in her life. And Thomas labored beside her, never treating her as lesser, never holding her back. One evening, as the sun sank golden over snowy peaks, Sarah stumbled on ice near the barn. Thomas caught her arm before she could fall. For a moment they stood close, his hand steadying her, his eyes searching hers. The warmth of his grip lingered, and her breath caught in her throat. Careful, he said softly. Yes, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant the ice or the feelings growing inside her. But the peace they had built together could not last untouched. Trouble had a way of finding those who dared defy the town. It arrived one Sunday morning in April. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw dust rising in the distance. Several riders approached fast from Cedar Ridge. Her stomach clenched. Thomas, she called, her voice tight. He stepped from the barn, his face hardening as he spotted the riders. "Get inside, Sarah." She obeyed, but watched from the window as 6 men reined up in the yard. Among them were Harold Garrett, the storekeeper, Carl Hensley from the bank, and William Porter, the judge's son. They had come with purpose, not a kind one. Garrett spat tobacco into the dirt. "Morrison, we need words." "Say your piece," Thomas replied, calm but steady as a drawn bowstring. "It's about the woman." Porter sneered. "The town won't stand for her living here. It ain't decent. She works for me," Thomas said firmly. "Keeps house, tends garden, helps with stock. That's all. If your minds wander elsewhere, that's on you, not her." "You expect us to believe that?" Hensley laughed cruelly. A man alone, suddenly taking in a young woman. "Everyone knows what kind she is." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She saw Thomas's shoulders stiffen, saw his jaw tighten. "Careful," Thomas said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's a lady you're speaking about." "A lady?" Garrett spat again. "She's a—" He never finished. Thomas's fist shot out, catching him square in the jaw. Garrett fell back, stunned. The others surged forward, and instantly fists and boots flew. Sarah's heart pounded. 6 against 1. Thomas fought hard, but they beat him down, blows raining from every side. Blood streamed from his lip, his eyes swelling shut. He staggered, nearly falling. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed the rifle Thomas had taught her to use. She burst onto the porch and fired a shot into the air. The crack silenced the yard. "The next one goes into someone," she shouted, chambering another round. "Back away from him!" The men froze, glaring at her, but they stepped back. Fury burned in William Porter's eyes. "This ain't over," he spat. "You've got 1 week to send her packing. After that, we come back, and we won't be talking." The men mounted and rode off, leaving silence behind them. Sarah rushed to Thomas, helping him inside. His ribs were bruised, his lips split, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "This is my fault," Sarah whispered. "I should leave before—" "No," Thomas interrupted, gripping her hand despite the pain. His voice was raw but certain. "You're not leaving, not now, not ever." Tears blurred her vision. "Why, Thomas? Why risk everything for me?" He reached up with a trembling hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Because I love you, Sarah Whitman. I've loved you for months, and I'll be damned if I let them take you away." Her breath caught, her heart racing. "I love you too, but love won't stop them." "Then we'll face them together," he said, his eyes blazing. "As man and wife." "Marry me, Sarah, now before they come again." The words struck her like lightning. Marriage, safety, belonging, love, everything she thought she had lost forever. Her tears fell freely as she whispered, "Yes, Thomas. Yes, I'll marry you." Outside, the wind stirred the grass. Inside the small ranch house, battered and bruised but unbroken, 2 hearts pledged themselves against the world. The storm that had nearly taken Sarah's life months ago had brought her here. And now, as she lay her head against Thomas's chest, she knew whatever fight was coming, they would not face it alone.